Hello, our esteemed English-speaking auditory. My name is Vasiliy Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of September the 24th. So please join, watch this video, like it, subscribe, leave your comments below. Let's begin with some, I'll say, interesting and in some case good news to Ukraine.
First of all, it's worth starting with the meeting that took place yesterday between the Ukrainian president and the American president. Volodymyr Zelensky met with Donald Trump. Trump showered Ukraine with a lot of praise, saying that he is proud of and truly admires the fight that Ukraine is showing. He said that Putin is simply disgracing himself. He was supposed to end the war in 3 days, a week at most. But in reality, for 3.5 years now, he has just been disgracefully doing whatever he wants, so to speak. Zelensky said following this meeting that Trump has started to listen more closely and pay more attention to the Ukrainian side, to the Ukrainian interpretation of the realities of the fighting, because Putin had lied to him. At the beginning of Trump's term, Putin supposedly said that by the fall, they, the Russians that is, would definitely capture Donbas. As we can see, that did not happen. Trump supposedly became disappointed in Putin, but there are probably two main points that are worth highlighting from this meeting. The first point was made by Trump, who said that, in his opinion, with the support of European partners and NATO allies, Ukraine is capable of reaching and returning to the borders of 1991, and not only that, but possibly even gaining more. Let's be honest, Trump isn't exactly talking nonsense. He might be boosting our morale, but Trump is definitely not the one to talk about this. Trump is definitely not the one to decide on this either. Besides, he has already said so much during his second presidential term that there's simply no point in listening to him now. Please don't get your hopes up. These are just Trump's words, nothing more. That's what I have to say. The second story brought up at this meeting was about what's happening now near Pokrovsk, as our president mentioned. In particular, President Zelensky said that right now he was clearly referring specifically to Pokrovsk. And at the meeting with Trump, he stated that literally, just in the past week, our military has deoccupied 360 square kilometers of territory. Obviously, this refers to the Dnipropetrovsk salient held by the enemy, 360 square kilometers of territory. And pay attention to what Zelensky says, that 1,000 Russian servicemen have been encircled. 1,000, friends. So, what this means is that all the information I've been sharing, including last week, has now been relayed by one president to another president, someone he obviously won't lie to, or at least will try not to lie to. He's saying that up to 1,000 occupiers are now here in operational encirclement, and little by little they will start surrendering. In other words, we are on the verge of a truly grand potential victory and a shift on the front line. This could really change a lot if it actually happens. If up to 1,000 occupiers are physically captured and taken prisoner, not just cut off from their logistics. Although, in fact, really, yes, I talked about this yesterday as well. All these breakthroughs on the front are somewhat strange right now because it's still possible to deliver logistics to places like Kucherev Yar and the bases of these Zayachi Vushka to carry out logistics using drones from the enemy's side. And they are trying to do this. These garrisons are surviving here. But overall, this is a very big and significant victory, which of course can't be compared to, say, the context of Azovstal or something else when the occupiers had such achievements as capturing our Azov fighters. But in reality, the Russians failed very quickly and very seriously in this adventure on the Dnipropetrovsk direction. Yes, right now they have and are holding their forward units and unmanned aerial vehicle divisions here. The transfer and redeployment of these units here from the Sumi direction signaled that in the Sumi region, and recently I've spoken with more than one soldier from Sumi, from our northern borders, so the guys are saying that, in fact, Sumi is now completely secure. Absolutely, the enemy has zero chance of doing anything there. As for Oleksivka, Russian Z channels are writing that the suffering here is just insane. The 30th Rifle Regiment of the 810th Marine Brigade is really just destroying the Russians' potential here in the Sumi region. And just half a year ago, you could have recalled that Trump was talking nonsense, including about the Sumi region. So I wouldn't take his words too seriously. But going back to Donbas right now, truly fantastically advanced units of the Russian Federation are gathered here. The fields are all strewn with drones, meaning fiber optic cables from the drones. The Rubish Brigade, the Power of Freedom Unit, the Power of Freedom Battalion are demonstrating. Here is this video from Donbas. You can see how the fields are interwoven with this fiber optic cable. By the way, this is exactly what characterizes the Russians when they have a main attack point, when they need to make a serious breakthrough somewhere or disrupt the enemy's logistics. They gather these advanced strike UAV units and just bomb and pound the area daily, hourly, using only fiber optic drones. They just carry out this relentless, insane fiber optic bombing without stopping. As far as I understand, we don't have such capabilities yet. The Russians, on the other hand, gather into a fist. They go, they bomb again. And this is exactly what we're seeing now in Donbas. But this doesn't save the situation for the Russians. However, again, even though I say that the president's words to Trump are the second important takeaway from the events that took place at the UN General Assembly in New York, but it's also worth considering another context. When we look at the front, we should think and reason not only in terms of Dnipropetrovsk, these northern outskirts or the northern direction from Pokrovsk, but also the southern outskirts. And even the southern areas, all the way to the old Novopavlivka direction, to the borders of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Because frankly speaking, the situation here is not encouraging. It is not encouraging in the context of the movement or even the presence of our soldiers in Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. Even despite the successes of the operation in Dobropilya, the logistics of this area are just hellishly complicated. And what is happening here, in particular the pressure on the enemy towards the city, the attempts to break through to the logistics and physically cross the road to Pokrovsk, none of this can be pleasing. There are, moreover, just a ton of occupiers here. They are pushing very, very, very hard towards Pokrovsk, willing to lose entire armies just to achieve at least some informational or propaganda victories, Pyrrhic victories, but they keep pushing here and pushing. Well, the battles for Pokrovsk, we will still see more of them. We will still see a huge number of Russians destroyed. But I'm talking about the south of Pokrovsk, not just the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk, but also further south of Pokrovsk itself. That is, these areas, what is now called the Novopavlivsk or Velikomikhailivsk direction, or I don't even know what to call it anymore, maybe some other direction, where the Russians are actually putting pressure on the Dnipropetrovsk region from many locations. In general, there is information that the Russians are now going to somewhat shift and move their main direction of attack specifically to these areas along the borders of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Because, well, as I already mentioned, they completely failed near Sumi. They can't launch an offensive in Zaporizhzhia, and from the very beginning, they already redeployed their units from Zaporizhzhia to Pokrovsk. Then from Pokrovsk, they are slowly starting to move them to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Why? Because first, they feel that this topic is resonating in the Ukrainian information space. Well, like we're already in the Dnipropetrovsk region, we're pushing forward here. This will bring them certain benefits if they manage to capture a significant part of the Dnipropetrovsk region. This will give them informational benefits like playing the madman and playing this idiotic card, spinning the narrative that they're still operating in another region. Thirdly, the Russians understand that they've managed to break through here and they're trying to concentrate their reserves in this single breach and expand on this success. Because essentially this is the only direction where, for now, we still can't manage to control the situation. In fact, it's the only direction where, on the deep state map, changes are constantly appearing, literally every day. If we look back over the past week, there are daily updates specifically here in this direction, which used to be called the Novopavlivka direction. And the Russians are advancing in Berezove, and these last few days they've been making progress on the ridges between Novoselivka and Sosnivka. And the Russians are pushing forward along many of these directions. In addition, Ivanivka, this village, will soon have to be considered among the most intense areas as well. By the way, this village is part of the so-called new Donbas defensive line. Do you remember when there was the Dobropilya breakthrough? At that time, the Russians reached the area up here to the north in the vicinity of Zolote Kolozia. Back then, there was a huge uproar because having reached Vasiliy and Zolote Kolozhzhia, the occupiers had essentially made it to the new Donbas defensive line, to its first, let's say, rows of this defensive line. And now Ivanivka, located further south at the crucial junction of the Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, well, Ivanivka is also a significant village that is indeed the very first settlement on the path, so to speak, of the invading occupiers toward this critically important major Donetsk defensive line.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And it is precisely here that the occupiers have now also made their way. I think that Ivanivka will appear in deep state reports, and overall there will be somewhat more attention paid to it in the near future. Because previously the occupiers tried to take Filia, advancing toward it through the western outskirts, through the forest located here near Filia. They were unable to gain a foothold in Filia, so they chose a new target, Ivanivka, and now they will be putting pressure here. It will be necessary to stabilize the situation there, but the enemy is currently making a significant effort to secure their position here. Further south, in the areas I've already mentioned, Sosnove, Novoselivka, Berezove, Novoivanivka, that is, at the junctions of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions. Right here, Olhivske Turnov. The enemy will very likely even redirect its main striking force here, as I've already mentioned. And there are analysts, for example, Kostiantin Mashovets, a well-known and respected analyst from the Information Resistance Group, formerly a colonel, well, currently a reserve colonel, or perhaps already retired from the armed forces of Ukraine. And he writes in his analysis that, in his opinion, subjectively, the situation here in the Dnipropetrovsk region looks much worse than in Kupiansk, Lyman, or Pokrovsk, where it would seem the situation is critical. Precisely because in this context, the enemy is advancing here, well, the main explanation for this, as Mashovets writes, is that the enemy is advancing here with the most promising indicators compared to other directions. This promising nature of the indicators is primarily reflected in the enemy's numerical superiority over our troops, because in some places, a single one of our battalions is facing an advance by 3 or 4 or even 5 or 6 enemy battalions in its area of responsibility. Well, you can understand for yourself how difficult it is to hold the front line under such conditions. That is, when the enemy's numbers are 3 to 4 or even 5 to 6 times greater than yours. And that's in ideal conditions if we had fully staffed battalions. But in reality, they are under strength by, well, a significant percentage. And in such situations, it creates a scenario where it's very difficult for us to stabilize things here, because due to a lack of resources, these, let's say, localized, what in Russian would be called ochagovi, defense points appear. That is, specific points are created, lines, separate points, lines, individual positions, individual defense nodes, which, unfortunately, the Russians, thanks to their numbers and our inability to conduct reconnaissance everywhere 24/7, and at the same time, along with reconnaissance and detecting the enemy, also have enough operators to physically strike these groups in sufficient numbers. So the Russians, taking advantage of the fact that we cannot completely destroy them in the Dnipropetrovsk region, slip through these individual positions that our troops have established and then get into our rear, creating corresponding problems that through these penetrations into the combat formations of the armed forces of Ukraine later cause us serious issues. And this is exactly what we are currently facing in the Dnipropetrovsk region. I repeat, there is information that the enemy is now shifting its main focus there in order to, well, strike where it hurts, to break through where it's thin, so to speak. In the Zaporizhzhia region, there is also one of the locations where the enemy believes the line is thin, and they have been attacking it for a very, very long time already. This is the settlement of Stepnohursk. I know for sure that, well, by the way, Deep State wrote yesterday that in Stepnohursk, the third attempt by the occupiers to break through was eliminated just yesterday. Honor and glory to the 210th Separate Assault Regiment, which is holding this settlement and was once again carrying out a sweep, preventing the enemy from advancing towards Stepnohursk. Right now, the Russians are trying to enter from several locations, through the wetlands and Primorsk towards Stepnohursk. They're even attempting to move through the eastern outskirts of Stepnohursk. If they can't get through to Stepnohursk, they try to make their way further toward Primorsk, where they are also being destroyed. Now, it's a different assault regiment, not the 210th, but the 33rd Assault Regiment. So overall, in the Zaporizhzhia region, the Russians are suffering just colossal losses, but at the same time, they still have an advantage in infantry. However, so far, they haven't been able to actually use this infantry advantage to occupy or secure positions in Stepnohursk at all. As we've mentioned repeatedly, Stepnohursk gives the occupiers the ability to carry out fire strikes both on Zaporizhzhia and on the logistics of Orikhiv. For now, the Russians aren't using drones on Zaporizhzhia, but are shelling it with Kabs. Honestly, they're just beasts. The way they strike at the civilian population of Zaporizhzhia, it hurts me very, very much, because Zaporizhzhia is a city close to my heart. My mother is originally from Zaporizhzhia, so that's how it is. It truly pains me a great deal when, well, this unfortunate situation happens, but once again, all honor and glory must go to our brave units who steadfastly do not allow the enemy to establish other types of, let's say, significant fire damage or, God forbid, complete fire control in the crucial region of Zaporizhzhia. That is to say, in Zaporizhzhia, our dedicated assault regiments are doing their absolute utmost best to keep the overall situation as stable and secure as humanly possible. So, folks, and to conclude this presentation, I'll share a truly interesting and inspiring little highlight, something that will undoubtedly serve to uplift and invigorate our collective fighting spirit, encouraging us all to persevere with renewed determination and enthusiasm. On August 20th, at the end of summer, that is a month ago, there was a strike at the Russian training ground, Molkino, in Krasnodar Krai. According to sources, 14 Ukrainian drones reached the site. And do you know what those 14 Ukrainian drones did? They destroyed 6, according to some reports, 6 Iskander operational tactical missile systems. Take a look at this. Look at this beauty. Those Iskanders, the ones that launch ballistic missiles, they were destroyed, the launchers themselves. In addition, a Panzer S-1 anti-aircraft missile and gun system was damaged. And you can see all of this in these photographs. The entire hangar was destroyed overall. And this was all done by Ukrainian drones. That is, long-range strikes, our destruction of Russia's economy, which even Trump is now talking about. He mentioned it yesterday as well. They are simply doing incredible things. I bow deeply and respectfully to every assault trooper, every long-range operator, and every defender in our armed forces who makes this truly fantastic result possible. By the way, pay attention to this. Time and again, including just yesterday in the General Staff's report, there was information that supposedly a strike was delivered on the main line called the Steel Horse. Who carried it out? The drone forces and the units of the missile troops and artillery. And do you know what that means? This means that such missile forces, that is, our missiles, really exist. This is not fiction. It's like, well, son, this isn't science fiction, and they do reach Russian territory. So on that positive note, I'll end for now. Thank you for your attention. Please like, leave your comments, and subscribe to us. All the best, and see you next time.